I have spent 30 years in uniform watching the eastern flank of this alliance hold. I commanded armor in Europe. I sat in rooms where the map of Belarus was not a curiosity, but a strategic obsession. I have watched Russia probe, test, and reposition for 3 decades. Nothing, and I want you to understand the weight of that word, nothing in those 30 years prepared me for the intelligence picture that landed this week. 100 T-14 Armata main battle tanks, the most capable ground combat system Russia has ever fielded, repositioned to Belarusian soil within 72 hours of the order being issued, 40 kilometers from the Polish border. The Suwalki Gap, the single most contested piece of real estate on the NATO eastern flank, is now staring down the barrel of a Russian armored formation, the size of which has not been seen this close to a NATO border since 1981. And Washington is scrambling. Let me be precise about this. 100 T-14 Armatas. Each platform carries a 125 millimeter 2A82 1M smoothbore cannon with an autoloader capable of 10 rounds per minute. Each tank runs a crew of 3, isolated in a frontal capsule with active protection systems capable of defeating most NATO anti-tank munitions currently in theater inventory. The formation moved in 3 rail columns through Minsk, arriving at the Brest Oblast staging area over a 48-hour window ending Tuesday. Satellite confirmation from 2 independent Allied intelligence sources. Polish border defense forces went to their highest readiness posture within 6 hours of the imagery reaching Brussels, and the NATO Secretary General invoked preliminary Article 5 consultation procedures at an emergency session that the mainstream press has barely touched. I want to be honest with you about something. When I first reviewed this intelligence summary, I sat with it for a long time. I have watched Russia move equipment before. I have seen the exercises, the provocations, the deliberate ambiguity, but this is different. This is not an exercise formation. Exercise formations do not pre-position logistics trains. Exercise formations do not deploy field repair depots within 12 kilometers of the border. What I am looking at is a combat-ready armored grouping with a self-sustaining logistics tail designed for offensive operations. That distinction matters. It matters enormously, and the human cost of getting that distinction wrong will not be measured in policy documents. It will be measured in the families of soldiers in the Polish 11th Armored Cavalry Division, who right now are waiting for orders that could come at any hour. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through 4 questions that every serious observer of this situation needs answered. First, what is the actual military capability of the Armata formation, and can NATO armor currently in Poland defeat it? Second, what is Russia's operational objective? Because this deployment makes no strategic sense unless you understand the 3 options Moscow is actually holding. Third, what did Article 5 consultation actually trigger? And what are the specific alliance response mechanisms now activated? Fourth, what does this repositioning tell us about the broader Russo-Belarusian strategic integration that the Pentagon has been understating in its public assessments for 18 months? If this is the kind of analysis you have been looking for, the kind that does not soften, does not manage, does not sanitize the operational reality on that border, subscribe and stay with me. Hit like. Drop your assessment in the comments. I read every one of them. The T-14 Armata is not comparable to the T-72 variants that have been attrited in Ukraine. I want you to understand what that means before we go any further. The T-72, the T-80, the T-90, these are Cold War architectures with modernized electronics. They are capable platforms with known vulnerabilities. The T-14 is a generational departure. The crew of 3 operates from a fully armored frontal capsule, physically separated from the autoloaded ammunition magazine in the rear hull. In every T-72 kill we have documented in Ukraine, the catastrophic kill mechanism was the same penetration triggering cook off of the exposed ammunition carousel. That mechanism does not exist in the T-14. The ammunition is behind an armored bulkhead. The crew survives a penetrating hit that would kill every man in a legacy Russian tank. That is not a marginal improvement. That is a doctrinal shift in crew survivability. The Afghan active protection system fitted to the Armata intercepted 2 out of 3 anti-tank guided missiles in publicly documented Russian test scenarios
against the FGM-148 Javelin, which is the primary man-portable anti-armor system currently deployed with Polish and NATO infantry. Along the eastern flank, the intercept probability in independent assessments runs between 65 and 80% in optimum conditions. 100 of these platforms operating in combined arms formation with organic air defense, electronic warfare assets, and dismounted infantry represent a penetration force capable of breaching a conventional defensive line that NATO currently fields in the Suwalki corridor.
Poland has approximately 247 Abrams M1A2 ZV3 tanks currently operational in theater, supplemented by 119 Leopard 2A5 platforms transferred from Germany in the last 18 months. The Abrams carries the 120mm M256 smoothbore, and its depleted uranium armor package gives it a protection level that competes with the Armata hull in a direct frontal engagement. But here is what I want you to understand. 100 Armatas are not the threat in isolation, they are the spearhead. Behind them, satellite imagery shows a motorized rifle grouping of approximately 8,400 personnel, 340 BM-3 infantry fighting vehicles, and a self-propelled artillery regiment of 48 2S-19 Mesta S howitzers with 152mm capability out to 29 kilometers. This is not a probe. This is a combined arms army level formation. That is the strategic verdict on phase 1. What is sitting 40 kilometers from the Polish border is not a diplomatic instrument. It is an operational force. Here is what the Pentagon is not saying in its public statements. There are 3 distinct operational objectives consistent with this force posture, and they are not mutually exclusive. The mainstream analysis has collapsed all 3 into a single-frame Russian provocation, and the collapse is a dangerous analytical failure. Option 1 is the Suwalki Gap seizure scenario. The Suwalki Gap is the 65-kilometer land corridor between the Kaliningrad exclave and Belarus. It is the only overland connection between NATO's Baltic member states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the rest of the alliance. If that corridor is closed by ground force, the Baltic states are physically isolated. They cannot be reinforced by land. They cannot be resupplied by land. The 100-kilometer depth of the corridor means a combined arms force of the type now staged in Brest Oblast could reach and seal the gap within 18 to 22 hours of a crossing order, depending on Polish and Lithuanian resistance timelines. NATO's enhanced forward presence battle groups in Lithuania total approximately 4,100 personnel against an army-level formation of 8,400 with 100 Armata tanks and 48 self-propelled guns. That forward presence does not hold the gap. It buys time. And time in that scenario is measured in hours, not days. Option 2 is the coercive leverage scenario. This is the position that parts of the intelligence community are emphasizing, and I think they are not wrong, but they are incomplete. The force posture is designed to extract a specific concession from Warsaw and Brussels. The most likely concession package involves 3 elements: suspension of further NATO military construction in Poland, specifically the Redzikowo missile defense installation, a commitment to no further F-35 basing within 400 kilometers of the Belarusian border, and a bilateral security dialogue that effectively gives Moscow a consultative role in Eastern flank deployments. That is an enormous ask. It is also exactly the ask that a 100 Armata formation 40 kilometers from Poland is designed to make credible. Option 3 is what I have been warning about for 2 years, and what the institutional analysis has consistently, and I would say deliberately, underweighted. This is the Belarus integration completion scenario. Alexander Lukashenko has been functionally a Russian military client since 2020. The Union State Defense Integration Agreement, signed in November of last year, transferred operational command authority over Belarusian ground forces to the Russian Western Military District. What that means, and I want to be direct with you about this, is that the Belarusian military is now a subordinate formation of the Russian order of battle. 100 Armata tanks are not visiting Belarus. They are garrisoning what is now effectively a Russian military district on NATO's eastern border. That is a permanent change in the geographic and operational reality of this alliance's threat environment. That is not a crisis. That is a new baseline. Let me tell you what Article 5 consultation actually means in operational terms, because the press coverage has reduced it to a diplomatic formality, and that is wrong. The preliminary Article 5 consultation procedures invoked at Brussels this week activated 3 specific alliance response mechanisms that have immediate military consequence. First, the NATO Response Force Alert Tier was elevated to its highest peacetime readiness designation. The NRF currently comprises approximately 40,000 personnel across land, air, maritime, and special operations components. The Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, the VATF, which is the leading element of the NRF, is now on a 5 to 7 day deployment readiness timeline. That is down from the standard 30-day posture. It includes one multinational brigade of approximately 5,000 troops, divisional enablers, and an air component. It is not sufficient to defeat the Brest Oblast formation in a direct engagement. It is sufficient to constitute a tripwire that makes any Russian crossing an unambiguous act of war against the alliance. Second, the standing NATO Maritime Group 1 has repositioned 2 destroyers and 1 frigate to the Baltic Sea, bringing the Allied surface presence in that body of water to 7 warships. The significance is not offensive. The Baltic is a constrained operational environment. The significance is the signal. 7 NATO warships in the Baltic tells Kaliningrad that its naval corridor is under observation and contestable. Third, and this is what the mainstream is not reporting, the intelligence sharing protocols under Article 4 have been upgraded to a wartime classification tier for all alliance members adjacent to Belarus. That means Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are now receiving near real-time satellite and signals intelligence feeds from NSA and JISQ that are normally held at a higher classification. The Polish 6th Airborne Brigade, currently stationed at Krakow, has reportedly been given warning orders consistent with a potential redeployment to the Suwalki region within 72 hours if the tactical picture changes. I am not speculating. That is a report from a source defense correspondent in Warsaw, whose work I have followed for 11 years. That is the strategic verdict on Phase 3. Article 5 was not theater. It was the activation of a specific and sequenced response architecture. Whether that architecture deters the formation in Brest Oblast or merely documents the inadequacy of the alliance's eastern flank posture is the question that nobody in Brussels wants to answer in public. I warned in analysis 2 years ago that the Union State defense integration would produce exactly this kind of forward staging capability for Russian armor. I stated clearly that the Brest Oblast depot infrastructure, which was quietly expanded between 2021 and 2023 with rail loading facilities capable of handling heavy armor was not a logistics routine, it was preparation. That assessment did not reach the public posture. The public posture continued to treat Belarus as a separate actor. It was not a separate actor then, and it is certainly not a separate actor now. The Pentagon's public statement this week described the Armata deployment as of concern and under close monitoring. I want you to sit with those words. 100 of the most capable main battle tanks on Earth, 40 kilometers from a NATO border, with a combined arms army behind them, draws the phrase of concern. A $750,000 drone strike on a Syrian depot draws a press conference. This draws two words and a monitoring posture. Here is what is actually happening inside the building. The Office of Net Assessment has completed a revised threat assessment for the Suwalki Gap scenario that I am told through a sourced channel concludes that current NATO in place forces cannot hold the corridor against the Brest Oblast formation for more than 36 to 48 hours without air superiority. Air superiority over that corridor requires suppression of the S-400 Triumph batteries positioned in Kaliningrad, of which there are currently 3 active regimental sets. Suppression of those batteries requires an air campaign of a complexity and duration that no alliance member currently has the political authorization to execute. It is not a capability gap, it is an authorization gap. And that gap is what Moscow is reading, not the Abrams, not the F-35s, the authorization gap. The adversary does not build a 100 Armata formation and position it 40 kilometers from a NATO border without understanding the decision calculus inside the alliance better than the alliance understands itself. That is not a strategic accident. That is decades of institutional intelligence work. That is exactly the kind of adversary capability I have told audiences on this channel to respect, not because I endorse it, but because underestimating it is how soldiers die. What happened in Brest Oblast this week is not a Belarusian border incident. It is a statement about the architecture of European security that will not be walked back by a diplomatic note or a Brussels communique. In Moscow, the operational planners reading the NATO response understand precisely what the of concern language means. It means the alliance is not prepared to escalate. It means the authorization gap is confirmed. It means the next move is Moscow's and Moscow's alone. The T-14 formation is not going to advance this week. It does not need to. It has already achieved its first order objective, which is the demonstration that the eastern flank is contestable at a level the alliance cannot currently address without a political decision that no member government has the domestic support to take. In Beijing, the People's Liberation Army's Strategic Planning Directorate is not watching this as a European crisis. They are watching it as a stress test of Article 5's operational credibility. The conclusion they are drawing, and I have no doubt about this, is that a collective defense guarantee that produces a 2-destroyer repositioning and a phrase of concern in response to 100 advanced main battle tanks is a guarantee whose operational weight is measurable and limited. That measurement will inform planning timelines in a different theater entirely. The connection between Warsaw and Taipei is not metaphorical. It is the same calculation run in a different geographic and temporal frame. For the Gulf states, the lesson is starker. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have spent the last 3 years recalibrating their security relationships away from Washington on exactly the thesis that American extended deterrence is a diminishing asset. This week's NATO response, or near absence of response, will arrive in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi as confirmation of that thesis. The defense procurement conversations in both capitals will accelerate their shift toward Chinese and Russian systems, not because of ideology, but because of arithmetic. A security guarantor that cannot defend a 65-kilometer corridor in its own alliance, is a security guarantor whose guarantees are priced accordingly. For the broader developing world, the Armata deployment in Brest will be remembered as the week that the post-Cold War European security order showed its structural limits, not collapsed, showed limits. That distinction matters, but the limits are now visible in a way they were not visible before Tuesday. The question I want to leave you with is this. Given that NATO's current in-place forces cannot hold the Suwalki Gap against the Brest Oblast formation without an air campaign that no alliance member is politically authorized to execute, does the United States have a credible military option on the eastern flank that does not require either a massive escalation of force commitment or a public acknowledgement that Article 5 has a gap that adversaries can read and exploit? That is not a rhetorical question. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. If this analysis delivered something the mainstream would not, share it with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening on that border. Hit like, subscribe. The next assessment is already in preparation. I will see you in the next one.